1 million terrorism suspects in America. A leading civil liberties group claims that's the number on the watch list. How effective is the system? What are the risks to personal freedom? And how can America protect itself? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Lauren Taylor. 1 million names under the watchful eye of the United States. America's so-called terrorist watch list has hit the record number, according to one of the country's most prominent civil liberties groups. The American Civil Liberties Union says the terror list is bloated and out of date. The group has slammed it, complaining that it's out of control, a waste of resources, and that it treats the rights of the innocent as an afterthought. Charges the government strongly denies. From Washington, Rosalind Jordan has more.
7 years after the September 11th attacks, security at the U.S. border is tighter than ever. Travelers face additional checks before they can enter the country or get on a plane. But it's the hidden security measures that are now under fire. Officials from the American Civil Liberties Union say that the so-called terrorist watch list now contains 1 million names, and the ACLU says there is no way there are 1 million potential terrorists.
Clearly, we need to have a very discrete list that has on it the names of individuals who we know to represent a threat.
It recently took an act of Congress to get former South African President Nelson Mandela removed from the list. But the ACLU says that too many innocent people whose names might resemble those of suspected terrorists, including businessman Akif Rahman and former government lawyer Jim Robinson, have been detained, questioned, or sometimes abused just because they wanted to fly, or in Rahman's case, return from overseas travel.
The questions puzzled me. They included, did I know any of the September 11th hijackers? Had I ever given money to a terrorist group? Do I know anyone that had? Those seemed strange to me and made me feel like a suspect.
The ACLU bases its million-person count on recent Justice Department documents examining the program. But officials there say that's an exaggeration. They say about 400,000 people are on the watch list, and only about 20,000 of those people are U.S. citizens or legal residents. Why the discrepancy between the ACLU's numbers and the government? Intelligence officials say one person might be using many fake names, IDs, or birth dates in hopes of getting past security, a point the ACLU doesn't dispute. As for whether the list is ineffective, a spokesman tells Al Jazeera, quote, the ACLU's own material is contradicted by the very reports they cite, which have found that the terrorist watch list has helped combat terrorism and enhanced U.S. counterterrorism efforts. The experience of law enforcement and intelligence agencies and the findings of independent auditors is that the watch list is a very effective counterterrorism tool. Officials also say they do scrub the watch list for mistakes and are trying to do a better job of responding to flyers' complaints. The ACLU says in the end, it might take an act of Congress and a new president to fix the system. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Well, joining our discussion today are our guests in Anchorage, Alaska, Bill Scannell. He's a privacy advocate and a former Army intelligence analyst. In Washington, D.C., David Gartenstein-Ross, Vice President of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. And in London, Sahir Hussain, a civil liberties lawyer. If I could go to you first, Bill Scannell. We heard there in that report that there's a discrepancy between the figures, 1 million according to the civil liberties groups and around 400,000 according to the government. Still quite large numbers. What do you make of this list?
Well, all I can tell you is that your producer did an excellent job convincing me to leave my own home once I found out that there were 1 million terrorists crawling around my once great nation. It's thoroughly depressing, and it's a mockery of justice. Clearly, there aren't 1 million terrorists running around the country, nor are there 400,000. What we have is a list that is used to intimidate and cause fear in the public in order for fear merchants and war profiteers to make money. It serves absolutely no point whatsoever in security. And I mean, if people feel safer because of this, they can carry around a rock. I've carried this rock with me since September the 12th, and I've never been the subject of a terrorist attack. So clearly, this anti-terrorist rock is doing an excellent job. Certainly one as good as the watch list.
David Gartenstein-Ross, if I could come to you, what do you make of that theory that it's simply fear-mongering, this list, and a waste of time?
Well, it's a decent soundbite, but it doesn't work too well in the real world. One of the problems with the September 11th attacks was that the activities of the hijackers who were in Southeast Asia prior to coming into the U.S. were known by the CIA. The problem is that the CIA didn't relay the information to the authorities who were charged with making sure that terrorists don't enter the borders. The terrorist watch list was designed to prevent things like that. Now, look, if the question is are there too many names on the terrorist watch list? Is it bloated? The answer is clearly yes. There are some mechanisms in place that are designed to try to weed that out. For example, there's a redress process that exists currently. There's an independent review that's being conducted by the Terrorist Screening Center when names come up 6 or 7 times in the course of a year, which indicates that there are false positives coming up. But I do think that this is something that's necessary to have in place. The question is, how can we make it better without sacrificing the benefits of when someone has a connection to terrorism, being able to apply some additional scrutiny to them?
Zahir Hussain, would you agree that this is a necessary device to have this list, which at least has suspects on it?
No, I think it serves absolutely no purpose whatsoever. If you look at the figures of illegal immigrants into the United States, whether we're talking about South America or from economic migrants, the numbers are so huge that the fact is, if a terrorist wanted to get into the country, would use that method rather than flying into Washington or New York. It really is sort of more of a hindrance on proper, safe travel between unhindered travel for different ordinary people. And what it does is it simply makes ordinary people reluctant to travel to the United States.
Bill Scannell, if I could bring you back in, on the point that David Gartenstein-Ross was making, that after September the 11th there were criticisms of the agencies for not sharing information. With this they are sharing it, so now they're being criticised again. So they can't win, can they?
That's not really my problem. They can share information all they want. My problem is that it is anti-democratic to have a secret list with somewhere between 400,000 and 1 million people on it that prevent Americans from traveling in their own country. It attacks the very foundations of our nation, and it makes me wonder whether these people are all just moles for Al-Qaeda, because this is exactly what Osama bin Laden wants. He wants us to destroy our own system, and the idea that my Aunt Hattie can't fly from Cleveland to Dubuque is not only absurd, it's anti-democratic and violates everything that I was raised to believe in as an American. And we somehow are supposed to be exporting democracy to the rest of the world? I think not.
I'm sorry, your statement is purely inaccurate. The only thing that prevents people from flying in the United States is the no-fly list, which is maintained by the TSA. The 400,000 names that are being referred to here are not part of the TSA's no-fly list. Instead, this is the list that's being maintained by the TSC, which is the Terrorist Screening Center.
And you know this how? You have absolutely no security background, nor do you have any background in this particular subject.
You're absolutely incorrect, actually. I do work on border security, and this is coming directly from the head of DHS Civil Rights Civil Liberties.
Homeland Security is willing to even defend this.
Well, as I said,
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. I was just merely commenting that you have no background in this.
David Ross, if I could just
okay.
Yeah, just put to you.
Good.
The defence from the government is that they're saying that this list is very effective. In fact, it's one of the most effective counter-terrorism tools that our country has. Would you think that's overstating it, or do you think that's fair enough?
I think that it is an effective tool to have. It's good to be able to have this information. I think that, as I said, within the field, people who deal with this, everyone will agree that there are too many names on the list. I don't think that that's a controversial statement. It's one that's bad for a couple of reasons, one of which is that people have to screen far too many people and get far too many false positives. Second, from a perspective of community policing and community building, I think it's something that is very alienating for groups that are disproportionately affected by the list. But in terms of having this in place, we do know that airlines remain a target. For that reason, they're good to protect.
Okay, so here, Hussain, if I could bring you in, do you think there are too many people on the list, and does it unfairly target particular groups?
Well, there's absolutely no doubt about that whatsoever. The targets for this profiling are Muslims, people of a particular sort of a non-white background, generally speaking. There are people, obviously, of white colour, but on the whole, this is a non-white people of Middle Eastern or South Asian background. And that is the real sort of the cause of the problem here. We've had in Europe issues with the Irish Republican sort of violence, and lists were created, people were harassed, travellers were harassed. all it did was it alienated those very people who could possibly be providing intelligence or providing support to the authorities with a view to stopping those people who are determined to commit acts of violence.
OK, let's just remind us of how this thing works. It's called the Terrorism Screening Centre, or TSC, which maintains the list of terror suspects. The TSC is a continuation of the US terrorist watchlist facilities, which began after the 9/11 attacks. The centre is run by the FBI and has been in operation since 2003. Its aim is to establish a global screening network to support the detention of terrorists and to coordinate the US government's approach to terrorism screening. They maintain what's called a terrorist screening database. This is a list of names of terror suspects and is accessible to government screeners such as police officers, customs officers and embassies. Bill Scannell, if I can come back to you, you've worked in the kind of intelligence arena. How important is it what you actually put on a database? Because presumably the information needs to be accurate, otherwise there's no point in having a list.
Quite. I mean, what one ends up with is a 1-1 map of the world, and this is what's so sad and pathetic. Anyone in the United States or in the world can be put on this list by any level of law enforcement. It's a secret list that you don't know really quite how one gets on, and you don't know how you get off either. So if you happen to upset your local sheriff or deputy in some whatever small town you happen to come from, you can end up on this list. And it is not only disingenuous but incredibly inaccurate to say that this is not used in the United States. I mean, anyone named David Nelson finds themselves getting stopped at airports. People with very common names, like even my own senator's wife, Catherine Stevens, who goes by Cat Stevens, was prevented from boarding an aircraft. So to say that this isn't affecting ordinary Americans trying to travel freely within their own country is absolutely wrong. It is an abomination that people have to look at secret lists in order to travel in their own nation.
OK, David Gartenstein-Ross, on that point of people turning up on the list when they're not actually suspected terrorists at all, we've had James Robinson, who was a senior official, appearing on it, Senator Ted Kennedy, and amongst others. If people like that, who are quite high profile, can end up being mistakenly stopped, presumably ordinary folk can as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think everybody on the show agrees on that. That's not a question whatsoever. There are two redress mechanisms here that are worth noting, and I'm not saying that they're necessarily sufficient. One of those is known as TRIP, which is if you continually get misidentified, you can petition to DHS that you get taken off of the list. And secondly, there's another aspect which I mentioned before, which is being done by the Terrorist Screening Center. That is that when a name comes up 6 or 7 times in the course of a year, that shows that there almost certainly is a false positive out there. Now, look, there are a lot of false positives in the list, and we agree on a lot of basic points. I think the area of disagreement between the panelists is it worth having a list in the first place? To me, it is worth having the list because there are people who want to strike the airlines. That was shown, for example, in the August 2006 transatlantic air plot. To that extent, it is worth being able to note when people have been connected with terrorism, but we need to make the list more streamlined. We need to make it more effective. And I agree with the other panelists that we do need to ensure that it isn't trampling the rights of ordinary citizens. OK, on that note, we're going to take a quick break, talk a lot more about the list and the controversy surrounding it in just a moment. Do stay with us on Inside Story.